Hey guys, so today I want to talk about improvisation. And I specifically want to talk about how to get more comfortable with improvisation. This is something that I've had to go through myself. Even just 3 years ago, I was incredibly uncomfortable with improvisation. The first improv anything I ever played in public that wasn't just like a tiny section in a piece that I faked my way through was the 365 with the final day of 365. It was literally the first time I ever played anything that came out of my own head in public. So clearly a lot has changed in the last 3 years, and I think honestly this process has been more like the last 6 years. But I really want to talk about this because I think improv is a very important thing in your musical development. It doesn't have to be something that you do all the time. Like, you don't have to just become an improviser and do improv shows and do all the things that I'm doing and other people are doing, but it is a very useful thing. One, because it helps you explore your instrument a little bit more. You can find the intricacies of your instrument, its quirks, its wolfs, its whatever, its tuning issues, its really beautiful notes, by improvising and by pushing the limits and doing it in a way where no one's asking you anything. You also can learn to love your instrument a little bit more by discovering what it really can do, your physical instrument and also it as an idea. I also think that my contemporary playing personally improved tenfold when I started improvising because I had more control over the sounds I was using. Because in improvising, I was able to push them and figure out what they did when I put more air into it, or aimed my air a different direction, or added my voice to it, or whatever it was. I was able to gain more control and also have some more building blocks to then put into my notated repertoire. And while I know a lot of you guys are not contemporary players, that same idea is true for anything. Being able to push things to their limits and then be able to pull them back in a way where no one's asking you anything except try it, that is very, very important. So, I understand how daunting this can be. I hated improv. I literally used to write out solos when I was being asked to improv. Like, I could not do it on the spot, even if I had guiding pitches or like an aleatoric section where I just had to pick out pitches and play them. I legitimately planned them in my head. I just could not do it. So I understand. I completely understand. However, you have to start somewhere. The reality of the thing is, like, you have to put your toe in the water. At some point, you just have to try. Obviously, that's hard. And obviously, you're not going to want your first foray into the improvisatory world to be in public. If you do, then more power to you. But if you were like me and very scared, then do it in private. There's nothing wrong with that. The way I started was that my teacher in my master's asked us to start each practice session with an improv. It didn't have to be long. She always said like 2 to 5 minutes was good, and it didn't have to be good. It didn't have to be anything. It was just try to improvise something. And I will admit that 90% of the time I lied and said that I did, but I did do it sometimes because I couldn't feel completely okay with myself if I didn't at least try it. And I never felt like they were good or that they were things that I enjoyed. But that's because I wasn't really taking into account the sounds that I love and the sounds that I enjoy exploring, so that's something later. But basically, I just played modified arpeggios and scales for like 2 minutes and then was done. And that's a great place to start. You're not playing something that's on the page, you're not playing something that was written out for you, but you're playing something that you know and that you have control over. So controlling that variable at least means that you have that to work with. And obviously, because you're not playing off a page, if you play a wrong note, it's not wrong anymore because you're not playing off a page. And that can cause you to modulate into something else. Or like, there's so many variables that you can mess with, even just playing scales. So my suggestion is to start there and to just, instead of playing your Taffanel and Gobert or whatever the other method books are for other instruments, clearly I'm a flute player, just play scales from memory, and if you mess up, quote unquote, then take it and run and see what happens. I still use a lot of arpeggios and as my basis point to try to figure out what else I want to do. If I'm not really interested in a sound or I don't find a sound immediately, then I play an arpeggio and try to make it fun. The other thing is controlling your variables. Setting limitations for yourself is super, super helpful. I think some of the best improvs I've ever done were ones that came out of the 30 Days of Improv challenge. Because I was given limitations and because I was given constraints, there were a lot more things that I was able to do because I was thinking in a box and trying to push out of it. So if you're having trouble figuring out where to start, set a couple limits for yourself. Like, you can only use an octoconic scale and you can't play with vibrato. It doesn't really matter. Just pick a couple limitations and put them on yourself and see what happens. And if it's terrible, no one has to know. And honestly, most of the time, they're not as bad as you think. But the reality is you're doing this for yourself, and you're doing this in the safety of a practice room. And we've all heard the weird things that come out of practice rooms. Like, you're no different than anyone else making strange sounds, and you might not even be making that strangest sound. The other thing that I do is graphic scores. I think graphic scores are a great start, especially if they're ones that are a little bit more structured. They're not just pictorial graphic scores. If you are interested in learning more about how to read graphic scores, I have a video that I will link in the cards. But that is another form of guided improvisation. So I think that's the thing to start with, is guided improvs, and just do them a couple minutes. If you hate it, then you're done and you can move on with your life. But if you do it every few days, then sometimes you'll find some stuff. And if there's something that you're struggling with, like you can't get this multiphonic, or can't figure out how to do slap tongue, or whatever it is, I'm thinking about contemporary sounds because obviously that's what I do. So then you go, okay, I'm going to do an improvisation and I'm going to only use percussive sounds, and I'm going to try to figure out how to do slap tongue. And if it doesn't work right now, that's fine, but maybe you'll find some cool sounds in the process that will work instead of slap tongue while I'm figuring it out, or better than slap tongue, and then I can go to the composer and go, hey, can I do this instead? But it's just about exploring the sounds that you have and the sounds that you love. So even if you're not working on something, it's like, hey, I really like B major. Play in B major. Nothing wrong with that. The other thing that I don't personally do, because I don't play a ton of pre-1950 repertoire anymore, is come up with cadenzas for the piece, the concerti that you play. I mean, everyone knows the Mozart concertos because we kind of have to, unfortunately. So you don't necessarily have to do the Mozart concerto. I'm just thinking of that because it's the easiest example. But come up with a weird modern version of a cadenza for the Mozart concerto. The reality is you don't have to use the thing, but it's fun, and you can make Mozart sound slightly demonic and no one's gonna care because it's a cadenza, and if it's bad, again, it never has to leave the room. And yes, I understand that I'm saying this from the perspective of someone who is able to do this in public. But you do also have to remember that I was not able to do this in public about 3 years ago, and the only thing that changed was that I just started playing it. The last piece of advice that I have that isn't just start doing it, which I know is not the most helpful, is if you have trusted friends who are more comfortable, or even trusted friends who are not more comfortable, play with them. Because it's actually, the hardest thing to do is solo improv. I learned that the hard way once I started playing with other people and discovering that it was way easier to improvise when other people were improvising. But I got a couple people together and just jam. Again, it doesn't have to be any high stakes situation, just getting into a room and playing something. And if there's someone who's a little bit more comfortable, it's easier because you can follow their lead. And that's definitely something that I used to do, was just like hide in whatever they were doing and kind of create things out of what they were doing, and that's a great tactic if you're uncomfortable. But once you get more comfortable, then you can start pulling the lead and start pulling things a different direction, and people will follow you. It's very exciting the first time you start a sound and you realize that everyone else in the room has honed into what you're doing and is working off of you. But working with other people is easier because you don't have to fill the whole space. Silence isn't uncomfortable, and there are more people to throw around out motifs and ideas and sounds. So if you're truly struggling with a starting point, that honestly is probably the best. So, and I again, it's hard because you have to find other people, but there are lots of people in the world who are doing a lot of improv and love playing with other people. That's the thing with improvisers, is that we really, really want to do it with other people because it's way more fun. So if you can find other people to do it with, then you have your starting point. I hope this was at all helpful. I kind of just rambled about my process, and hopefully you can apply some of it to yourself. The moral of the story is basically just try it in a safe space. And if you're really struggling, do try it with other people. It does help, I promise. I know it sounds completely counterintuitive, but it does. As always, if you like this video, please give it a like. If you're new here, subscribe, and I'll see you guys very soon.